So in this video, I'll go over the inputables. So I'll just start with the inputable class itself. Only public methods is submit, registration, deregistration, and just the event type. That way for submitting registration. For the registration data, I have a registration state in the two commands. And then I have a map for key pressed um, registration and a map for key released registration. And then I have a get data method that'll return a pointer for some registration data and then just seeing registration, deregistration. So for the inputable, so for the submit key registration, um, so when it gets called with the key and the event type, it'll call get data, and in get data it'll check to see whether it's a key press or a key release. If that um, if that key is in the appropriate map, so in this case for key press, if it will say check for the A key, it will check to see if the A key is in the map. If it's not, it'll create registration data for it, and then return that registration data. And same thing with the release. Okay, and then so that's how we get the appropriate registration data for it. And just like the other examples, it checks to see if it's in the appropriate state. But for submit key registration, for the command, you can set the key and set the event, and then submit the commands. And then for the scene registration, again, it gets the appropriate data based off the key and the event, and then registers the inputable. Okay, and then for scene deregistration, it goes through. It'll get the correct registration data based on the key and event type, and deregister it. So, okay. And then for when the inputable is when this destructor gets called, it'll go through each map and just delete each of the registration data. So that's why I make sure I don't get any memory leaks. And then here's just the inputable attorney, the single key event manager, and the registrations have access to it. Okay. Then for the actual keyboard event manager, I have event type, key press, and release, uh, and register, deregister processing, and all the events are held in a map with the key being the actual key and giving access to a single key event manager or a pointer to it. Okay, and then the actual code for it. When a inputable gets registered, it um, it'll check to see if that key is already in in the manager, and if it's not, it'll create a new one. So it'll create a new single key event manager based on it. That'll register it, and then it'll um, add it to the map. If the key is already in the map, it'll just register it like normal. In the deregistration, it'll based off the key, it'll get the appropriate single key event manager and then deregister it that way. And then for processing key events, it goes through the map, which will go through each single key event manager and process those key events. And then for the single key event manager itself, register, deregister processing. And then I have a list of key presses and key releases. So for the register, based off of the event type, if it's a key press, it'll insert into the key press list. If it's release, it'll insert into the release. And this is just to make sure that everything's working fine. This should never get called, and it does not. For the deregister, depending on the event type, it's a key press, it'll remove it. Key release, it'll remove it. Um, as far as removing it goes, it's not entirely efficient. Could probably make it. I can make it more efficient by possibly using a delete reference. But moving on for the process events though, it'll I have a current state boolean that gets the current state of the key for the single key event manager, and then if that state is true and the previous state that it was in was false, it'll process the key press, or if the current state is false and the previous state was true, it'll process the key release, and the previous state is always equal to the current state at the end. Okay, then for the registration, so it has a couple more things compared to the other ones. Have set event, set the key, the execute like always, the inputable. It has the command holds the key and the event type for registration in this case. So say it just sets, and then actual executing the scene registration, then the deregistration, similar. Okay, then here's the class diagram, then here's the inputables. Game object, like always, inherits from it with no duplicate functions or methods. Then the inputables would be right here, keyboard event manager, and then the single event manager. Right, then here, inputable. Then for the keyboard event manager, so here is the documentation for the inputables, the keyboard event, and the single key event. Alright, and then I'll just show for the, well, right here at the, where is it? So here's the inputable destructor, right here. Keyboard event manager, destructor, and the single key event destructors, along with the inputable destructor. And I will run it again just to make sure that it does. All those destructors do get called. Again, no memory leaks, and all of these destructors do get called again, as well as with the other exables if I forgot to mention that. And that is what I have for the inputables.